Secretary Clinton, thank you for being here, and I join my colleagues in all of our appreciation for the job that you're doing as Secretary of State. A little earlier in responding to Senator Rubio and the decision about what happens after 2014, you talked about the continuing presence of NATO. And shortly after the President's speech last night, France announced that it too plans to begin drawing down troops. And obviously, several weeks ago, Secretary Gates talked about the challenges with our NATO allies. And so given that situation, do you believe that our allies in NATO will continue to step up and to help us in Afghanistan through 2014, and what assurances do we have that that will happen?
Well, Senator, that was the agreement at Lisbon, and I think a number of our NATO ISAF allies will be doing drawdowns proportionate to the troops that they have. There is a planning process within NATO as to how to manage that, because some are in areas where we have no U.S. presence. But there certainly has been an agreement that following 2014 there will be some kind of continuing presence. And I think that the President mentioned last night that the United States will host the NATO heads of state next year in Chicago, and it will be the time where we will take stock of where we are and the way forward.
And given the operations in Libya and the pressure that that's putting on both our capacity and the capability of NATO, is there concern that that will, in the interim, have an effect that will change our calculations for what's happening on the ground in Afghanistan?
I don't think so, Senator. I think that, certainly from NATO's perspective, they joined with us in the Afghan mission, and they were very anxious to have us join with them in the Libyan mission. And so I think that there's not necessarily a connection, direct line between the two, but the larger questions that Secretary Gates has been raising, which are not Afghan-related or Libya-related specifically, about the commitment of NATO, are ones that are going to have to be addressed.
Looking at the potential for a negotiated solution in Afghanistan, and I certainly understand and agree with you that and we've heard from everybody who's testified before this committee that this is not a military solution. It's got to be a political and negotiated solution. But Ambassador Newman testified before this committee that he was skeptical of power-sharing agreements. He said they only tend to last as long as it takes for one side to be strong enough to break it. I'm paraphrasing his comments there. Do you share this assessment, and do you think that there really is the possibility for any kind of an agreement with the Taliban?
I think there is, but I think that we're a long way from knowing what the realistic elements of such an agreement would be. I think that Ambassador Newman expresses a very common view that power-sharing agreements are often just a way station between fighting and a resumption of fighting if parties cannot maneuver out their opposition. I think it's too soon to say how this could play out in Afghanistan, but I can only stress that we are committed to pursuing it because it is the only path forward. There is no other path forward. Nobody is strong enough to really assert control. They can go back to a civil war. They can go back to all kinds of fighting between them. But I think a resolution is in the interests of the parties as well. We just have to work to determine what the elements would be. And
to go back to your discussion of the civilian surge, obviously we're talking about the need to draw down the military surge now. How do you look at the reduction of that civilian surge that's happened? And several weeks ago, I'm sure you're aware, this committee issued a report that talked about the false economy that's being created in Afghanistan by the amount of money that is available and what that's doing to the Afghan economy. So looking at that and looking at the civilian efforts and the economic efforts that we've put in there, how do you see that being drawn down, or do you, as we get closer to 2014?
Well, we do. I think that the recommendations that the committee made are ones that we are very seriously looking at. The committee recommended that the administration and Congress should consider working together on multi-year civilian assistance. Well, there's a big problem with that. We don't get multi-year civilian assistance. We get multi-year military commitments, and we have no disagreement that it would be great if we could. And Carrie Lugar-Berman was the first multi-year effort to commit to Pakistan. But we certainly are going to be looking at the programs we're running that are in conflict zones. I mean, one of the other points that the committee made was, why 80% of the funding is spent in COIN regions. And it's because, the military was very insistent that there needed to be a marrying up of civilian efforts. And the example I gave in my testimony about War Duck region is a very good example. And then finally, we need to focus on sustainability of our programs so that the Afghans can continue them, and we're looking at that as well. So, we don't agree with all the recommendations or all the conclusions of the committee report, but we wish we could get multi-year programs that could be implemented, and we had the flexibility and the agility. I mean, the committee, for example, talks about commander response funds. Well, we don't have those. I mean, I can't send a diplomat or a development expert out with $50,000 or $100,000 in his back pocket, but, young captains and majors can do that. So, I mean, we've learned a lot from this, and we will do our very best to try to implement those lessons. And I certainly, working with our team and Raj Shah over at AID, have been trying to wrestle to the ground how we get more accountability and more measurable outcomes from our assistance. So we're going to be changing in light of the military changes, but also in light of the lessons we've learned.
Thank you.